The towering skyscraper gleamed like a mirror in the early morning sun, its glass windows reflecting the bustling city below. Inside, the lobby was alive with the sound of polished shoes tapping across marble floors, the rustle of suits, the hum of conversations, and the occasional ring of phones. Executives and assistants hurried to their desks. Interns fumbled with files, and receptionists greeted people with well-practiced smiles. It was a place of power, ambition, and wealth. And yet, in the middle of all this grandeur, someone most people barely noticed knelt on the floor with a bucket and mop. Clarissa, a cleaner, scrubbed the tiles with quiet diligence. She was a woman of discipline, with tired eyes but a graceful presence. Day after day she came before dawn, stayed until evening, and left with little acknowledgement from anyone. Most saw her as part of the background, no different than the plants in the corner or the paintings on the wall. But Clarissa had a reason to keep going, a reason that gave her strength: her son, Marcus. Just 12 years old, Marcus was bright, curious, and carried himself with a maturity beyond his years. Every afternoon he would come to the building after school and wait patiently for his mother to finish her shift. He sat quietly with his schoolbooks in a corner of the lobby, his sharp eyes observing everything around him. Unlike others who dismissed him as invisible, Marcus noticed things others missed: small details, body language, patterns. That day, something about the air felt different to him. Maybe it was the way people were moving. Maybe it was the unease on the face of the security guard near the entrance. Or maybe it was simply instinct. As he glanced through the tall glass windows, he noticed a man lingering near a sleek black car parked right by the curb. Marcus recognized it instantly. Everyone in the company did. It was the CEO's car, a luxury sedan, polished to perfection, always waiting at the exact spot when Richard Dane, the company's powerful leader, needed it. The driver, waiting by the car, opened the rear door with precision. Richard continued forward without glancing at anyone, his gaze fixed on the screen of his phone. Clarissa, who had just noticed her boss, lowered her head respectfully, pulling Marcus closer to keep him out of sight. But Marcus wasn't watching his mother. His eyes were locked on the car. His heartbeat quickened. Something inside him screamed danger. His instincts told him that if Richard stepped into that car, something terrible would happen. His throat felt dry, his palms sweaty, but as Richard reached the glass doors, Marcus couldn't stay silent any longer. "Don't get in the car!" he shouted, his voice echoing across the lobby. Time seemed to freeze. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Every head turned toward the boy who had dared to raise his voice in the grand building. Clarissa gasped in horror, her face turning pale as she rushed toward Marcus, whispering harshly, "Marcus, stop!" Security guards stiffened, unsure whether to remove the boy or wait for instructions. Richard paused mid-step, his sharp eyes narrowing as he turned toward the voice. No one, not even his highest executives, ever spoke to him like that, let alone a child. His expression hardened, a mixture of disbelief and irritation. Employees whispered in shock, watching the scene unfold. Clarissa pulled Marcus close, stammering apologies. "I'm so sorry, sir. Please forgive him. He didn't mean—" But Marcus shook his head violently, breaking free from her grip. His voice trembled, but held a conviction far beyond his years. "Please, don't get in the car! Something's wrong with it!" The lobby fell into stunned silence. Even Richard's security detail exchanged uneasy glances. Richard himself remained still, his eyes locked on the boy. For a man who prided himself on control, on dismissing nonsense, there was something unsettling about the way Marcus spoke. Not fear, not disrespect, but certainty. For a long moment Richard said nothing. Then slowly he raised his hand, signaling his men. His voice was calm but firm. "Check it." The guards rushed forward, inspecting the vehicle. One opened the door while another crouched by the seat. Seconds later, the color drained from their faces. Hidden beneath the leather seat, wires and a small device blinked ominously. A bomb. Gasps rippled through the lobby. Employees clutched their mouths in shock. The realization hit like a wave. The CEO had just been seconds away from stepping into his own death trap. Clarissa staggered backward, horrified. Marcus's chest rose and fell rapidly, but he stood firm, eyes wide. The guards barked orders, rushing to secure the area. Alarms sounded as the building was evacuated. Within minutes, sirens wailed outside, and the bomb squad arrived to carefully remove the device. The street filled with flashing lights, police cars, and a growing crowd of onlookers. Through it all, Richard Dane stood still, his jaw clenched, his eyes fixed on the boy who had just saved his life. The CEO, a man untouchable in wealth and power, had been brought face to face with mortality, and it was the voice of a cleaner's son that had pulled him back. He walked slowly toward Marcus, ignoring the chaos around him. Kneeling slightly, he looked the boy straight in the eye. His voice was low, steady, but carried an intensity that made even the nearby guards shift uneasily. "You saved my life," Richard said. Marcus swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. Clarissa trembled beside him, tears in her eyes, whispering again, "I'm so sorry, sir. He didn't mean to." But Richard raised a hand, silencing her. His gaze never left Marcus. For the first time in years, Richard Dane, the ruthless CEO, felt something he had long forgotten: gratitude. The crowd outside buzzed with questions. Who had planted the bomb? How had security failed so badly? And how had a boy, barely 12, noticed what no one else did? Whispers spread like wildfire across the company. The cleaner's son had saved the CEO. The story would not just stay in that lobby. It would ripple through the entire building, the entire company, and beyond. The street outside the skyscraper was still blocked off, police tape fluttering in the wind, and sirens echoing faintly as the bomb squad carefully carried away the device. Employees huddled in small groups on the sidewalk, whispering furiously, their faces pale with shock. Some were still trying to process what had happened. A bomb in the CEO's car. It sounded like something out of a movie, not real life. And yet there it was, undeniable. In the middle of the chaos, Richard Dane stood tall, his suit immaculate despite the adrenaline pumping through his veins. He was a man used to being in control of every situation. But this was different. Someone had tried to kill him, and the only reason he was still alive was because of a 12-year-old boy. Marcus stood beside his mother, his small frame dwarfed by the towering adults around him. His eyes darted nervously between the flashing police lights and the CEO. Clarissa kept an arm around him, protective and trembling. She was terrified not just of what had almost happened, but of what might come next. She expected her son to be scolded, punished even, for daring to shout at the most powerful man in the building. But Richard's piercing gaze was fixed on Marcus in a way that no one had ever looked at him before, like the boy mattered. When the police finally approached Richard, explaining that the device had been real and sophisticated, he nodded curtly, his face unreadable. "Find out who did this," he ordered, his tone brooking no argument. The officers promised a full investigation, but Richard didn't wait for more words. He turned back toward Marcus and Clarissa. "Come with me," he said simply. Clarissa froze. "Sir?" "I said come," Richard repeated, his voice calm but firm, the kind of tone that expected no refusal. He gestured to his guards, who immediately cleared a path through the crowd and ushered them back inside the building. The lobby, now eerily quiet, echoed with the sound of their footsteps. Employees who had lingered inside stared wide-eyed, whispering in disbelief as the CEO led a cleaner and her son into the executive elevator, a space reserved only for the highest ranks of the company. Clarissa felt out of place, her uniform smudged with cleaning supplies, her nerves stretched tight. Marcus clung to her hand, wide-eyed but curious. The elevator rose swiftly to the top floor, opening into Richard's office, a vast room lined with glass walls that overlooked the entire city. The skyline stretched endlessly, a view only a man of his stature could command. The office itself radiated wealth, dark wood furniture, shelves of awards, and a desk that seemed to belong more to a king than a businessman. He gestured for them to sit. Clarissa hesitated, perching nervously on the edge of a chair, while Marcus sat beside her, clutching his backpack. Richard himself didn't sit. Instead, he stood by the window, his hands clasped behind his back, silent for a long moment, as if choosing his words carefully. Finally, he turned. His eyes, cold and sharp in business meetings, were softer now, though no less intense. "You saved my life," he said slowly, directing the words at Marcus. The boy swallowed, his voice quiet. I just saw a man. He looked suspicious. I thought he did something to your car. I wasn't sure, but when you started walking out, I couldn't let you get in." "And you were right," he let out a breath, shaking his head slightly. "My own security team didn't notice, but you did." Clarissa jumped in quickly, desperate to keep things from going too far. "Please, sir, he's just a child. He didn't mean to shout at you like that. Richard raised a hand, silencing her. "Your son has sharper eyes than most men I employ, and more courage." He looked back at Marcus. "Do you understand what you did?" Marcus hesitated. "I stopped you from getting in the car." "You saved me," Richard corrected firmly, "and that's not something I forget." Clarissa lowered her gaze, tears welling in her eyes. She wasn't used to kindness, especially not from men like Richard Dane. For years she had been invisible, her work unacknowledged, her struggles unnoticed, and now here was the most powerful man she knew speaking to her son with respect. But Richard wasn't finished. He moved closer, leaning on his desk. "Tell me everything you saw." Marcus recounted the details carefully, the nervous man, the crouching by the car, and the hurried exit. Richard listened intently, nodding occasionally. His sharp mind was already working through the implications. This wasn't random. Someone had orchestrated it, someone who had access, someone who knew his routine. The thought made his jaw tighten. When Marcus finished, he leaned back, his eyes narrowing. "You are observant, very observant. That's a gift." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "I just pay attention." Richard's lips curved in the faintest hint of a smile, rare for him. "More than most adults." He glanced at Clarissa. "I want you both under protection. Whoever planted that device won't stop here. You'll be moved somewhere safe." Clarissa's eyes widened. "Sir, that's not necessary. We're fine." Richard cut her off. "It's not a request. Your son saved my life. That makes him important, and anyone important to me gets protected." There was no arguing with him. Clarissa nodded reluctantly, overwhelmed by the sudden turn of events. That night, Marcus lay in a guest room far grander than anything he had ever known. The soft bed, the warm lighting, the quiet hum of the city beyond the window, it all felt unreal. Clarissa sat beside him, brushing his hair back gently, her heart heavy with worry. "You did something brave today, Marcus, but I don't know what this will mean for us." Marcus looked up at her with steady eyes. "I couldn't let him get in, Mom. I just knew it was wrong." Clarissa kissed his forehead. "I know, and I'm proud of you. But the world of men like Richard Dane, it's dangerous." Neither of them realized just how right she was. For while Richard had decided to protect them, others within the company saw Marcus differently. To some, he was a hero. To others, he was a problem. A boy who noticed too much, who could ruin carefully laid plans. And in the shadows of the city, the man who had planted the bomb was already plotting his next move. Meanwhile, Richard stood alone in his office, staring out at the skyline. He had built his empire on logic, control, and power, but today none of that had saved him. A boy had. A boy who should have been invisible, the son of a cleaner no one ever acknowledged. And for the first time in years, Richard felt something stir within him, not just gratitude, but reflection. He poured himself a glass of scotch, his gaze distant. "Who are you really, Marcus?" he muttered to himself. The answer would come, but not before the entire company was shaken to its core. The news of the attempted attack spread through the company like wildfire. By the next morning, whispers traveled down every hallway, across every department, into every cubicle. Executives huddled behind closed doors, assistants exchanged frantic messages, and the rank-and-file employees shared theories in hushed voices over coffee. Nobody could believe it. A bomb in the CEO's car? It was unthinkable. Even more unthinkable was how it had been discovered. Not by trained professionals, not by the expensive security detail, but by a boy, a cleaner's son. Marcus had suddenly become the center of attention in a world that had ignored him all his life. Employees who once walked past him without so much as a glance now stole looks of curiosity and respect. Some whispered with admiration, others with skepticism. But everyone knew his name. Clarissa, however, was uneasy. She wanted no attention, no spotlight. For years she had survived by being invisible, blending into the background, doing her work quietly and efficiently. Now all eyes were on her and her child. And that, she feared, could only mean trouble. Richard Dane didn't seem to share her concern. On the contrary, he seemed almost intrigued. The morning after the incident, he summoned Marcus and Clarissa to his office again. The guards escorted them with unusual care, treating them not as common employees, but as people of importance. When they entered, Richard was already waiting, standing by the massive window with his back to them, the city skyline stretching endlessly beyond the glass. He turned slowly, his face as sharp and unreadable as ever, but there was something different in his eyes, something calculating, curious. "Sit," he said. Clarissa sat hesitantly, clutching Marcus's hand. Marcus sat beside her, his backpack at his feet. He wasn't afraid, but he was cautious, watching Richard the way he had watched the stranger by the car. "You saw what no one else did," Richard began, his voice calm but firm. "That tells me you notice things most people don't. Tell me, Marcus, is that something you do often? Watch people?" Marcus nodded slowly. I like to pay attention. Sometimes people say things without saying them. You can see it in how they move, how they look around. Like that man by your car. He wasn't acting normal." Richard's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile, but close. "You're sharper than most of my executives. Do you know that?" Marcus shook his head, unsure how to respond. Clarissa cleared her throat nervously. "Sir, please, he's just a boy. He didn't mean to interfere. I don't want him dragged into—" Richard cut her off with a raised hand. "Interfere. He saved my life, and I don't use those words lightly." He leaned forward, his eyes locking on Marcus. "You didn't just act on instinct. You acted with courage. Most adults would have stayed silent. You spoke up. That makes you different." Marcus looked down, fidgeting with the strap of his bag. "I just didn't want you to get hurt." Richard studied him in silence for a moment. Then he spoke again, more softly this time. "Do you know what courage is, Marcus? It's not the absence of fear. It's doing what's right even when you're afraid. And you did that." Clarissa's heart ached. She wanted to pull her son close, to protect him from this man's world, but there was something undeniable about the way Richard spoke. He wasn't just grateful. He was invested. Richard straightened. "From now on, you and your mother will not go unnoticed. I'm making arrangements. Clarissa, you'll no longer work as a cleaner. You'll take on an administrative role. Better pay, better hours. As for you, Marcus," he paused, his gaze steady, "you'll be enrolled in a private school, the best one. You deserve more than sitting in a lobby waiting for your mother to finish cleaning floors." Clarissa's mouth fell open. "Sir, that's too much. We can't accept." "You can, and you will," Richard interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. "This isn't charity. It's recognition. Your son saved my life. That changes everything." Tears welled in Clarissa's eyes. For years she had fought to keep food on the table, to give Marcus a chance at something better. And now, in one day, the impossible had been offered to them. But still she worried. Nothing in Richard Dane's world came without strings. Richard's voice hardened slightly as he shifted the conversation. "What happened yesterday was no accident. Someone wants me dead. And they had help. Inside help. A device like that doesn't get planted without someone knowing my routine." His eyes flickered with anger. "There's a traitor in my company, and until I find them, everyone is a suspect." Marcus tilted his head. "Even the people close to you?" Richard's gaze darkened, "Especially the people close to me." The room fell into a heavy silence. Clarissa shivered at the cold certainty in his voice. Marcus, however, didn't look away. He was processing, observing, the same way he always did. Richard noticed it and leaned forward slightly. "You see things, don't you? Things others miss. That makes you dangerous to the people who want me gone." Clarissa's heart sank. She didn't want her son anywhere near this world of betrayal and power struggles. But Richard continued, "That's why you'll both have protection. You'll be moved into one of my residences, safer than where you are now. Guards will watch over you." "Sir, please," Clarissa tried again, desperation in her voice. "We don't belong in your world. We just want to live quietly." Richard's expression softened slightly, but his tone remained firm. "Quiet living isn't an option anymore. Not after yesterday. You've both been pulled into this, whether you like it or not. And I don't leave debts unpaid." That night, Marcus lay in a room bigger than their old apartment. He stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The sheets smelled clean, the bed was soft, and yet his mind was restless. He kept replaying the moment in his head. His shout, the frozen lobby, the bomb. What if he hadn't spoken up? What if he had stayed quiet? The thought made him shiver. Clarissa sat by his side, holding his hand. "Are you all right?" she asked softly. Marcus nodded. "I'm fine. Just thinking." She brushed his hair back. "You're brave, Marcus, but I worry. This man, Richard, he's powerful, and power is dangerous. I don't want you caught up in it." Marcus turned his head toward her, his young face serious. "But Mom, what if I can help him? What if I can see things that keep people safe?" Clarissa's chest tightened. He was just a boy, but already he carried a sense of responsibility far beyond his years. She kissed his forehead. "Promise me you'll stay careful." "I promise," Marcus whispered. Meanwhile, across the city, in a dimly lit office, a man sat in silence, his hands clenched into fists. He was the one who had planted the bomb. The plan was perfect, the timing flawless, and yet it had failed, ruined by a boy. His anger simmered like fire in his chest. A cleaner's son had undone everything. He poured himself a drink, his eyes narrowing. "You should have died, Dane," he muttered under his breath. "And next time you won't escape. Not even your little hero can stop it." In the skyscraper's top floor, Richard Dane stood alone in his office, gazing at the city lights. He thought of the boy's shout, the certainty in his voice, the way he had seen danger before anyone else. Richard had spent his life surrounded by adults who flattered, schemed, and lied. And yet the one person who had saved him was a child with nothing to gain. For the first time in years, Richard felt something shift inside him. He didn't know yet if it was trust, admiration, or simply curiosity. But he knew one thing: Marcus was different. And that difference would change everything. The following weeks transformed the company into a fortress. Security doubled, every car was checked, every employee monitored. The glittering corporate building that once buzzed with normal office chatter now carried a tense edge, like the walls themselves knew danger was near. Everyone walked a little faster, spoke a little softer, and eyed each other with suspicion. Clarissa felt out of place in her new administrative role. Gone were the mops, buckets, and long nights scrubbing marble floors. Now she sat at a desk with a computer, handling schedules, answering calls, and typing reports. It was better pay, but the stares from colleagues never stopped. Some envied her sudden rise, whispering that she had used her son to gain favor. Others looked at her with cautious respect, as though touching her meant touching the boy who had saved the CEO's life. Marcus, meanwhile, adjusted uneasily to his new school. The classrooms were bright and modern, the students wealthy and polished. He wore the uniform awkwardly, carrying books in a backpack that still bore patches from his old neighborhood. Some students mocked him for being different. Others watched him with fascination, aware of the story that followed him everywhere, the boy who stopped an assassination. Marcus ignored the sneers, kept his head down, and focused on what he did best: observing. But while the world changed around them, the danger never went away. The failed attack was only the beginning. Somewhere out there, the man who planted the bomb was still plotting, and Marcus, young as he was, could feel it like a storm waiting on the horizon. One evening, Richard invited Clarissa and Marcus to a private dinner at his mansion. The long dining table was covered in silverware, candles flickered in crystal holders, and soft music played in the background. Clarissa felt uncomfortable in the borrowed dress Richard's staff had insisted she wear. She wasn't used to luxury, and she worried her presence here meant something she couldn't yet understand. Richard raised a glass of wine. He said, "To new beginnings." Marcus clinked his water glass with Richard's, but his eyes were elsewhere. He was watching the staff, the shadows, the way a guard shifted near the door. Something in the man's posture bothered him, too rigid, too tense, as though his focus wasn't on protecting, but on waiting. Clarissa noticed her son's distraction. "Marcus, is something wrong?" Marcus shook his head slowly, but Richard leaned forward, curious. "What do you see?" he asked. Marcus hesitated. He didn't want to sound paranoid, but he had learned to trust his instincts. "That guard, by the door. He's not looking around like the others. He's looking at you. Only at you." Richard's eyes flickered toward the man casually, his face unreadable. He set down his glass and tapped the table twice. Instantly, two other guards stepped forward and seized the man Marcus had pointed out. A struggle broke out, knives flashed, and within moments, the traitor was disarmed, dragged to the floor. Clarissa gasped, clutching Marcus. The room erupted into chaos, but Richard remained calm, almost cold. He stood slowly, his eyes on the restrained guard. He demanded, "Who sent you?" The man spat on the floor, glaring up at him. "You'll never make it out alive, Dane. They'll get you sooner or later. No child can save you twice." Richard's jaw tightened. He motioned to his men. "Take him to the authorities, and make sure he talks." As the trader was dragged away, Richard turned back to Marcus. For the first time, his composure cracked. He said quietly, "You saw it again. You saved me again." Clarissa held Marcus close, her heart pounding. She couldn't deny it any longer. Her son wasn't just lucky. He had a gift, one that placed him in the middle of Richard's dangerous world, whether she wanted it or not. After the incident, Richard called a secret meeting with his most trusted executives. Clarissa and Marcus were asked to wait in another room, but Marcus's curiosity gnawed at him. He pressed his ear to the heavy door, catching fragments of the conversation. Inside job, more than one trader. Money laundering, board members involved. If they get rid of you, the company falls into their hands. Marcus's young mind pieced it together. Someone high up in the company wanted Richard gone. The bomb, the trader at dinner, it was all part of a larger plot. When Richard emerged from the meeting, his face was grim. He caught Marcus staring at him, and for a long moment they simply looked at each other. Then Richard spoke softly, almost to himself. "They think I'm alone in this fight. But I'm not. Not anymore." The days that followed brought more attempts: sabotaged vehicles, poisoned documents, corrupted software in the company systems. Each time, Marcus noticed something small that others overlooked: a twitch, a hesitation, a pattern out of place. Each time, Richard listened to him, and each time, disaster was narrowly avoided. The employees began whispering a new nickname for Marcus: the Watcher. To some, he was a lucky charm. To others, a reminder that a child was outsmarting seasoned professionals. Either way, respect grew, not just for Richard, but for the boy by his side. Clarissa worried endlessly. She wanted to pull Marcus away, to leave the city, to return to obscurity. But Marcus was resolute. "Mom," he told her one night, his voice steady, "if I stop helping, he might die. I can't just pretend I don't see things." Tears filled her eyes as she hugged him tightly. "You're just a boy," she whispered. "I'm your boy. And I'll be careful, I promise." The final confrontation came on a stormy night. Richard had called an emergency meeting at the top of the skyscraper, determined to confront the board members he suspected of betrayal. The rain pounded against the glass walls, lightning flashing over the city. Guards lined the hallways, but tension was thick in the air. Clarissa and Marcus waited in a secure room nearby, but Marcus couldn't sit still. Something felt wrong. He paced back and forth, then suddenly froze. "Mom, the storm. That's it. It's a distraction." Clarissa frowned. "What do you mean?" Marcus's eyes widened. "No one checks the roof in storms. If someone wanted to get close without being seen—" He bolted for the door. Clarissa called after him, but he was already gone. He ran through the corridors, heart pounding, until he found the stairwell leading up. The door to the roof was slightly ajar, rainwater dripping down the steps. Pushing it open, Marcus stumbled onto the rooftop. The wind howled, rain soaking his clothes. And there, crouched near a ventilation shaft, was a man with a rifle pointed straight at the glass-walled boardroom below. "Stop!" he yelled, his voice carried away by the storm. The man spun around, shocked to see a child. For a split second, hesitation flashed in his eyes. Then he lifted the rifle toward Marcus. But before he could fire, a shot rang out from behind. Richard's security team, alerted by Marcus's shout, swarmed the roof. The gunman was tackled, disarmed, and dragged away, cursing into the storm. Richard himself appeared moments later, rain plastering his suit to his body. He looked at Marcus, his chest heaving, and for once the stoic CEO seemed lost for words. Finally, he placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. You saved me a third time." His voice cracked slightly. "Do you have any idea what that means?" Marcus shivered in the rain but met his gaze steadily. "It means you're not alone anymore." Richard knelt down, eye level with him. In that moment, he wasn't the CEO, the billionaire, the untouchable titan of industry. He was just a man whose life had been spared, again and again, by someone who saw the world differently. Richard said softly, "You're right. I'm not alone. Not as long as you're here." The next day, the conspirators within the company were arrested, the traitors exposed, the threats eliminated. The scandal rocked the business world. But through it all, one truth stood out above the rest. The CEO was alive only because of a cleaner's son. Employees looked at Marcus and Clarissa with awe, no longer whispering, but openly acknowledging them. Richard made an official statement, his voice carrying across news outlets worldwide. Bravery can come from anywhere, and sometimes it takes the eyes of a child to see what adults cannot. For Clarissa, life would never be the same. She still feared for Marcus, still longed for a quiet existence, but she also knew something undeniable. Her son had a purpose, and in Richard Dane's world,